Matt steered his truck through the vast expanse of Alaska's darkness. The land seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. He was on his way to McCarthy, a unique blend of a laid-back, hippie vibe and old-fashioned frontier spirit. Nestled at the end of a rugged 60-mile dirt road within the immense boundaries of Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the town was a hidden gem. Despite its modest size, with just 200 residents and nearly as many dogs, McCarthy was a sight to behold. It rested snugly at the foot of a towering glacier where two rivers met and was surrounded by some of the most majestic mountains Matt had ever laid eyes on. For him, McCarthy was a slice of heaven on earth. However, he dreaded the thought of returning. Only the previous night, Matt had been lounging on a couch in Anchorage, anticipation bubbling within him. He was there to celebrate his second wedding anniversary with his wife Stephanie. That summer, they had taken separate paths. Matt, finding joy in the raw beauty of McCarthy, guided visitors on exhilarating adventures, while Stephanie stayed in Anchorage. She was chasing her career dreams, living with some close friends. Matt had always been drawn to the wilderness, having spent a decade as a wilderness guide. On the day that changed everything, he and Stephanie were relaxing on their friend's couch when she looked him straight in the eyes and delivered the gut-wrenching blow. "I cheated on you. 2 years ago, right before our wedding in McCarthy." His heart sank. This was not the gift he had imagined receiving on their second wedding anniversary. Struggling to find words amid the shock, he murmured, "I thought the second anniversary was cotton." Hearing this confession made Stephanie chuckle, but for Matt, it felt like a hurricane tearing through his very soul, breaking his heart into countless fragments. Each new revelation felt like a fresh blow. As he learned about the repeated betrayals and the depth of the affair that had spanned that summer, he hugged her tightly and walked away, heart heavy. Lost and disoriented, Matt's first instinct was to call his parents in Colorado. The idea of going home to a place of familiarity and warmth beckoned him. Throughout his countless adventures, from wild river explorations to 3-week-long mountaineering expeditions, and even recovering from frostbite on some distant glacier with a name he could barely pronounce, he had never heard such worry in his parents' voices. Yet circumstances pushed him back towards McCarthy. His dogs were there, waiting for him. Along the journey, he was overwhelmed by tears. It dawned on him how he had always showered Stephanie with unconditional love and respect. The depth of his trust in her made him believe she would never betray him. In retrospect, some things started to click. Stephanie's frequent trips with friends and the constant presence of Sam, her close friend from high school, started to make a haunting sense. He had never suspected Sam, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But the painful truth was now evident. Stephanie wasn't the woman he had believed her to be. Worse, she seemed to harbor no remorse. When they first crossed paths, Matt's attentiveness and zest for life drew Stephanie in. His enthusiasm for outdoor adventures and his innate ability to make her laugh had been the foundation of their relationship. He treated her with such reverence, always valuing her input before making decisions. However, to Stephanie, these gestures translated as a lack of assertiveness, something she mistook for weakness. Stephanie's upbringing had been tough. Most of the men in her life hadn't shown her courtesy or respect. That rough treatment had become her standard, her expected norm. As more truth unraveled, it was revealed that Stephanie hadn't just cheated with Sam, but with multiple men. Matt grappled with confusion, trying to make sense of it all. Perhaps she was on a quest to find the one, or maybe she was just lost in her own chaos. Either way, Matt found the entire situation bewildering. Before relocating to Alaska, Matt hadn't anticipated how deeply he'd fall in love with the wilderness. But his connection to the state was rooted in his family history. 3.5 decades earlier, his mother Elsa had journeyed to Alaska. Driven by a passion for wildlife, she aimed to study the behavior of the majestic bald eagles. Born amidst the bustle of New York City, Elsa craved the tranquility and vastness of Alaska. She secured a secluded cabin in Denali National Park, so remote that it was only reachable by air. Enter Ronan, a proud member of the Inupiaq tribe and a seasoned Alaskan. With his trusty charter plane, Ronan transported researchers, thrill-seekers, and essential goods across Alaska's sprawling landscapes. Elsa's original plans had her flying with a different pilot to the cabin. However, an unforeseen hiccup brought her to Ronan's airstrip. The ensuing journey was transformative for Elsa. As Ronan skillfully maneuvered through an approaching storm, he showed Elsa the migratory paths of animals, narrated tales from his heritage, and unveiled the celestial beauty of the Alaskan skies. By the journey's end, Elsa's perspective of Alaska had profoundly shifted. The remote Alaskan wilderness served as a backdrop for the building romance between Ronan and Elsa. Regularly, Ronan would fly to Elsa's cabin, bringing essential supplies or ensuring she was safe during severe weather spells. One evening became the cornerstone of their relationship. Elsa had been conducting research and found herself stranded on a glacier as darkness cloaked the area and temperatures plummeted. Just when all seemed lost, the distant hum of a plane reverberated across the icy plains. Guided by the shimmering stars and a gut feeling, Ronan arrived, her beacon in the cold night. As the northern lights painted the sky with surreal hues, Ronan opened up about his growing affection for Elsa. Amidst the vast silence of Alaska, their hearts found a voice. Elsa, equally smitten, whispered her love in return. However, their idyllic Alaskan love story faced a sudden hurdle when news arrived of Elsa's mother's ailment in Colorado. The bustling life in Colorado seemed a world away from Alaska's serene expanses. Elsa was torn, struggling between the call of family duty and the love she had found. But the thought of her ailing mother, alone and in pain, cemented her decision. Ronan empathized. For him, Alaska was more than just a home. It was a legacy, an intrinsic part of his soul. The idea of leaving meant abandoning the memories and spirits of his ancestors that seemed to whisper through the Alaskan winds. Yet looking into Elsa's anxious eyes, he remembered the commitment they'd made under Denali's towering silhouette to face life's challenges side by side. So, with mixed emotions and heavy hearts, they packed their lives and set forth for Colorado. There, Elsa's mother's health improved gradually but demanded constant attention. With Elsa expecting Matt and adapting to this unfamiliar territory, she was often overwhelmed. Recognizing the need to ground his new family, Ronan began working as a flight instructor, channeling his extensive knowledge as an Alaskan bush pilot. Years whisked by, and a grown-up Matt felt a pull towards the land of his parents' love story. Wanting to immerse himself in his Alaskan heritage, he decided to spend the summer there, reliving the tales and feeling the spirit of the place that was interwoven with his being. Although rooted in Colorado, Ronan wholeheartedly backed Matt's choice, handing him an antique compass that had once guided his own flights. "Let Alaska's voice guide you," he murmured as Matt set off on his adventure. Upon arriving in Anchorage, Matt's initial impressions sharply contrasted the idyllic tales his father had shared over the years. Anchorage seemed stuck in a time warp, reminiscent of the mid-1970s. The streets were dotted with hitchhikers, women of the night, and pushy drug dealers, eager to make a sale even when not solicited. It wasn't just the occasional shady corner. The eeriness was pervasive. From the early hours of the morning, groups of intoxicated individuals roamed the streets. They weren't merry or jovial. They were the kind who were ushered away from properties by law enforcement, only to stagger to the next spot and repeat the cycle. Matt's friend, who had come to collect him from the airport, weaved erratically through the streets in her Range Rover. She explained that pedestrians intentionally getting struck by vehicles was astonishingly not uncommon in Anchorage. They found themselves continuously swerving to avoid people. An overpowering scent of decaying fish lingered in the air. Bizarrely, salmon wasn't just a food source but seemed to serve as a sort of makeshift currency. Everywhere he looked, Matt witnessed people hawking their possessions, aggressively promoting their offers. Vehicles, including cars and trucks, were displayed for sale at startlingly low prices, yet upon inquiry, none came with the requisite legal documentation. Oddly, even in well-regarded dining establishments, staff routinely checked identification, even for early morning drinks. Every convenience store seemed equipped with drug paraphernalia right at the counter, catering to those ensnared in the clutches of methamphetamine and crack cocaine. Most heartbreakingly, Matt noticed numerous women, many of indigenous descent, with visible signs of physical abuse, blackened eyes, missing teeth. The sight was deeply unsettling, and it was clear that this Anchorage was worlds apart from the one his father had known. Throughout the weekend, every television screen seemed to play the same distressing footage: a police standoff on a nearby reservation. Several individuals were caught in the gunfire, their lives hanging in the balance. The reason? Illicit alcohol. These individuals had been apprehended attempting to smuggle alcohol into an area where its possession was prohibited. Rather than surrendering, they had seemingly chosen to confront the situation head-on in what Matt perceived as a desperate final stand. In Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska, such events didn't seem to faze the locals, but for Matt, sleep-deprived and sensitive, it was overwhelming. The last time he had seen such relentless media coverage was during the tragic events of 9/11. The quirks of Alaska were evident in other ways too. Despite it being daylight throughout the weekend, an unidentified man would mysteriously appear in the yard during the night, diligently trimming trees and bushes. Neighbors dismissed him, attributing his odd behavior to a possible obsessive-compulsive disorder. They'd say, "He's harmless," but to Matt, the man's arsenal of chainsaws, large clippers, and the machete seemed far from benign. Feeling unsettled, Matt reached out to his parents to share his experiences. His father Ronan listened with growing concern, especially when the topic shifted to alcohol-related incidents on reservations. This hit close to home for Ronan, as his own father had tragically lost his life in an alcohol-induced driving accident. Ronan, trying to instill a sense of hope in his son, told him that Anchorage, while a part of Alaska, wasn't the whole picture. In many ways, Anchorage was no different from any major city in the lower 48 states. To experience the genuine allure of Alaska, Matt needed to venture beyond the urban confines. Heeding his father's advice, Matt bought an inexpensive pickup truck and took to the open road. As the miles rolled on, the urban chaos of Anchorage began to fade, replaced by serene landscapes. Roughly 4 hours later, he found himself in the quaint town of McCarthy. The town's charm was evident from the onset: its rustic dirt roads and the need to traverse a bridge on foot to cross the river gave it an endearing authenticity. Matt was instantly captivated. For the next decade, he would often remark that while the breathtaking mountains initially drew him to McCarthy, it was the town's spirit that made him stay. The community's closeness was infectious. Its small size meant everyone knew everyone, fostering a strong bond amongst residents. Matt, always genuine in his interactions, was quickly embraced. He poured effort into his work and showed kindness to everyone he met. When Stephanie entered his life, it felt like fate. Their connection was instantaneous, and in no time, they committed to a life together in marriage. For Matt, McCarthy was more than just a place to live. It was where he felt safeguarded, cherished. As long as the community held him in good regard, and Stephanie's love remained unwavering, he felt invincible. But now, as he drove into McCarthy, everything felt different. An unsettling thought gnawed at him. Did the townsfolk know about Stephanie's betrayal all along? The once nurturing community now felt distant, its warmth replaced with an alien coldness. The place he once called home now seemed like an unfamiliar territory, making him question his place within it. Matt's mind wandered back to the initial days of his relationship with Stephanie. In retrospect, he realized there were clear warning signs that he had naively overlooked. These memories altered his perspective on loyalty and family values. For example, Stephanie was involved with another man when Matt entered her life. She never mentioned this to Matt, keeping him oblivious. Then there was the time Stephanie had requested to spend the night at a friend's place. Given there were 2 people named Alex in town, Matt had innocently assumed she was talking about the female Alex, but when he discovered she had stayed over with a male Alex, he still didn't jump to conclusions. He trusted Stephanie, taking her word when she said it was innocent. However, he later found out that this particular Alex was one of Stephanie's ex-boyfriends. The revelation stung, making Matt feel like he was the last person to know about his own life secrets. He felt exposed, wanting to escape and hide from everyone and everything. The thought of returning to his cabin was unbearable. In his distress, he sought refuge with his childhood friend, Chris, and Chris's wife. Chris had followed Matt to Alaska a year after Matt's own move. Their bond was deep-rooted, stretching back to their preschool days. Now, in Matt's darkest moments, Chris stepped up to support him. Matt was overwhelmed by an emotional pain so intense it manifested physically. His appetite vanished, sleep evaded him, and time seemed to crawl. The days felt endless, and Matt questioned if he could continue living in such anguish. A pivotal moment was on the horizon for Matt, one that would reshape his future. After spending a few emotionally taxing days with Chris and Karen, Matt felt it was time to give them some space. Living in a single-room cabin off the grid with your significant other was challenging enough without an emotionally drained friend taking up the limited space. So when his longtime friend Chester offered him a place to stay for the night, Matt readily accepted. He had known Chester since his very first day in McCarthy, a decade earlier. Their shared love for punk rock music had sparked their friendship, and their dogs, being sisters, only cemented their bond. Guided by the dim evening light, Matt trailed behind Chester, navigating the wooded path leading to his cabin. Both Chris's and Chester's cabin were in the same vicinity, linked by dirt tracks that carved through the dense forest. The night at Chester's turned into a heartfelt session of confessions and reflections. Matt voiced his internal battles about masculinity and how recent events had left him feeling stripped of it. He also admitted a deep-rooted concern, his constant need for approval, and his attempts to manipulate how people perceived him. Now, the one thing he desperately wished to keep hidden had become public knowledge. Though he might have appeared calm on the surface, beneath it raged a storm of anger. However, Matt was afraid to confront this anger, fearing its intensity and uncertain of how to channel it. Matt awoke with the heavy weight of his husky, a hefty 80-pound furball firmly planted on his chest. Her persistent nudges seemed to say, "Perhaps some dog cuddles might make you feel better." That morning, as the sun began to paint the sky with hues of orange, Chester brewed some coffee, a part of his daily ritual. Chester also lit up a cigarette, a habit Matt didn't usually indulge in. But today, feeling adrift and looking for something to anchor him, Matt smoked. Not just one, but a whole pack. As he prepared to leave, he realized his phone battery had drained, and he'd left behind his sleeping bag at Chester's. Retrieving it, he slung it over his shoulder, but before he could step out, Chester halted him. With a firm hand on Matt's chest, he said, "You have an unlimited well of power inside of you." It was a sentiment so uniquely Chester. With his sleeping bag in tow, Matt ventured into the woods, his thoughts heavy and his footsteps unsure. His loyal dogs, usually his companions, had abandoned him, lured away by the promise of breakfast at Chris's. Every step deepened his feelings of disconnection. His marriage felt like an illusion, and his very existence seemed tethered to that falsehood. Engulfed in this emotional turmoil, a realization dawned on him. He was genuinely lost. In a cruel twist of irony, Matt, an experienced wilderness guide, was disoriented in the very backyard of his friend. As he tried to find his way, the crunch of a twig beneath his foot seemed unnaturally loud. Turning to his left, he locked eyes with a massive grizzly bear, a mere 20 yards away, its size and presence an embodiment of all the fears he was currently wrestling with. Matt had faced bears multiple times before. Some of these encounters were with grizzly bears. He had even experienced what's known as a mock charge, when a bear charges at you not with the intent to attack, but to assess if you pose a threat or to simply frighten you off. It's their way of asserting dominance, much like a human thumping their chest. However, the gaze of this particular bear was different from any he had seen before. It roared and lunged at him without hesitation. Panic set in. Matt realized this wasn't one of those mock charges. He was in real danger. For a split second, Matt's reflex was to run, even though he knew that was the last thing one should do in such situations. Fear can overpower logic in moments of life-threatening danger. Regret surged through him as he remembered where his firearm was, 6 miles away in his cabin, safely tucked on his bedside table. Frantically scanning his surroundings for an escape, he searched for a tree to climb or a hiding spot. But in the vast Alaskan wilderness, such options were often scarce. With grizzlies capable of reaching speeds up to 40 miles an hour, Matt was painfully aware that any attempt to outrun it would be futile. In situations like these, the advised course of action is to play dead. One should lie face down to shield vital organs, use their hands to guard their neck, and remain motionless. Only if the bear's assault continues should one retaliate and fight back. That bear didn't realize that Matt had felt like he was on the verge of breaking for the past several days. The bear wasn't aware that life had been attacking Matt from all sides. Matt sensed that this bear wasn't going to back down, and no one was coming to his rescue. As he turned to face the imminent danger, he saw the bear charging through the bushes. With quick thinking, Matt covered his head with his brightly colored sleeping bag. Channeling all his pent-up pain, confusion, and raw anger, he let out a powerful guttural scream that echoed in the wilderness. Miraculously, the bear halted its charge. Now, the bear was only a few feet away. When it roared this time, Matt could see the droplets flying from its mouth and feel its warm breath mixing with the morning chill. Despite the imminent danger, something in Matt shifted. He realized he didn't want to give up on life. Against all odds and instincts, he locked eyes with the bear, a move considered dangerous. Summoning strength from a deep, unshattered part of himself, he matched the bear's roar with one of his own and took a bold step forward. This defiant move seemed to catch the bear off guard. It paused, looked at Matt as if reassessing the situation, gave a dismissive huff, and then slowly retreated into the wilderness. As the bear ambled away, Matt noticed a distinct scar on its ear, suggesting it had faced danger before, perhaps from a gunshot. Relief washed over Matt. In that intense moment, not only had he faced his fears, but also discovered the resilience he never knew he had. The bear paused and locked eyes with Matt. Gone was the fierce glare Matt had encountered previously. Instead, there was a softer, almost imploring look in the bear's eyes. In that split second, all the recent heartaches Matt had experienced seemed to fade, replaced by a sudden, deep connection to the raw beauty of nature around him. Reaching into his pocket, Matt pulled out a nutty candy bar and gently tossed it towards the bear. To his amazement, the bear ambled over, picked up the treat, and began to savor it. Many seasoned Alaskans might shake their heads at such a scene, quipping something like, "Always have your bear gun ready, you naive soul." But for Matt, the experience resonated on a much deeper level. He returned to his cabin that day with a renewed sense of courage and compassion. Life went on, and Matt continued his work as a wilderness guide, embracing every challenge with newfound strength. On one occasion, after an exhaustive day of hiking, Matt had set up a makeshift shelter by a babbling stream, ready to relax and catch some fish for dinner. But as he settled down, a shadow caught his eye. It was a massive grizzly, slowly making its way around the clearing, barely a stone's throw away. While Matt's supplies were at the mercy of the bear's whims, he had a firearm with him, but something told him not to use it. He observed the bear more closely, and a flicker of recognition crossed his mind. Over the years, he had encountered countless wild creatures, many bears among them, yet this one seemed familiar, and its gaze held a different, more intimate intent. Matt calmly continued his fishing, surprisingly unfazed by the bear's close proximity. As he cast his line, the bear attentively watched each movement, its eyes shining with intrigue. When Matt reeled in a decent-sized trout, he playfully tossed it over. The bear promptly devoured the fish, barely pausing to savor the taste. Every time Matt cast out his line, the bear shuffled even closer, eventually resting its hefty body right next to Matt's. Matt saw the scar behind his ear and recognized the bear. By evening, with a misty rain settling in, the two had formed an unusual bond. Matt had come to think of this gentle giant as Big Joe. As night approached, Big Joe even followed them back to the cabin, their footsteps harmoniously syncing up. After enjoying a hearty meal, Matt made a cozy fire outside and sat back, relaxing under the shelter, pipe in hand. All the while, Big Joe positioned himself just outside the warm embrace of the flames, watching every move Matt made. When the smoke wafted in Joe's direction, he would amusingly sneeze and snort. Matt, finding humor in the situation, mirrored Big Joe's actions, mimicking his snorts and playful head sways. The two sat side by side, enveloped in a peaceful silence. A connection had been forged in the wilderness, and Matt pondered if such a magical encounter was truly possible. After many visits, Big Joe stopped coming around. Matt assumed the bear had moved on to new territories. Inside Matt's cabin, walls adorned with maps and snapshots captured memories of places he had ventured to. On winter nights, the ambience was set by the warm glow of the fireplace and the sound of Matt scribbling his experiences onto the pages of his journal. When spring began to thaw McCarthy's winter blanket, Matt got an unexpected call. A group of newly minted doctors, swapping their medical gear for adventure equipment, sought to explore the Alaskan wilderness before diving into their demanding careers. Word had traveled to them of Matt's deep knowledge of the wild. In this group was Lila, a woman whose deep blue eyes mirrored the Alaskan lakes and whose spirit was as vibrant as the auroras in the night sky. She was immediately captivated by Matt. Beyond his rugged appearance and thrilling tales, it was his serene and thoughtful nature that drew her in. The expedition wasn't without its challenges: rugged landscapes, fickle weather, and close encounters with nature's inhabitants. But with every test they faced, Matt's leadership and experience guided them safely. As the days went by, Lila found herself gravitating more and more towards him. Their nights were spent by the campfire, swapping stories, sharing hopes, and weaving dreams together. And for Matt, after a long time, he felt a bond he couldn't push aside. For the first time in over a decade, the idea of leaving Alaska crossed Matt's mind, and it was all because of Lila. His past heartbreak made him wary of opening up his heart once more. He remembered the sting of lost love and the weight of sorrow it brought. Lila was indeed special, bright and beautiful, but the fear of enduring another heartbreak held him back. As dawn broke, the group prepared to depart from McCarthy, leaving Matt and his memories behind. The silence of the cabin soon enveloped him, a contrast to the lively chatter just hours before. Unexpectedly, Matt's phone buzzed to life, cutting through the stillness. Peter's voice came through, laced with worry. "Lila had a huge disagreement with us. She was adamant about going back to you, but we were on a tight schedule for our flight. Upset, she began heading back to McCarthy on foot." Panic surged within Matt. Without a second thought, he grabbed his coat, called his trusty dog to his side, and jumped into his truck. The usually serene road seemed eerily quiet, with only the whisper of the trees as company. Not long into his drive, he noticed Lila's backpack lying abandoned by the road. His heart raced as fear gripped him. Unsure of where she might be, he felt a mix of dread and desperation. Matt tried to call out, but his phone showed no signal in this remote area. Trusting his gut, he ventured into the thick forest. With every step, he became more attentive, hoping for a sign of Lila. When he discovered footprints, a spark of hope ignited within him. But that hope was short-lived as the trail ended suddenly, leaving him stranded amidst towering trees and overwhelming uncertainty. Driven by a gut feeling, Matt continued onward, his eyes catching the side of a distinctive rock formation ahead. As he approached, he noticed fresh footprints leading towards its base. Scaling a small incline, he spotted Lila, cold and trying to light a fire within a recess of the rock. Relief surged through him, and he hurried to her side, wrapping her in a comforting hug. Lila's face was streaked with tears. "A wolf surprised me," she began, her voice shaky. "I got scared, dropped my backpack, and ran here." The atmosphere became thick with unease as the said wolf stepped out, eyes glaring intensely at them. Its fur stood on end, and it bared its sharp teeth, edging closer with every step. A cold realization hit Matt. He had nothing to defend them with. Lila held on to him tightly, her grip betraying her fear, while their dog took a defensive stance, growling deeply at the advancing predator. Just as hope seemed to fade, a loud roar pierced the air. A colossal grizzly bear, fur glistening and eyes fierce, crashed through the nearby foliage. It was Big Joe, and he was charging straight at the wolf. The woods seemed to come alive, echoing with the confrontational sounds of the two powerful animals. Birds flew in panic, and trees rustled with the movement. With Big Joe's formidable presence, the balance shifted. He loomed over the wolf, roaring fiercely, asserting his dominance. There was a tense moment where the two beasts locked eyes, each evaluating the other. But recognizing the might of the massive bear, the wolf hesitated, and then, with a final wary glance, retreated back into the thick forest. Matt and Lila exchanged awestruck glances. After their close encounter with the wolf, Matt and Lila found comfort in each other's presence. The near-death experience and Big Joe's timely intervention seemed to cement their bond. They whispered thankful words, their hearts full of gratitude for the wild and its protective bear. Lila's decision to come back to him signaled a fresh start for Matt. The Alaskan wilderness had once again played matchmaker, just as it had for his parents years ago. Now he was set on leaving McCarthy and starting anew elsewhere. The wilderness had given him memories, lessons, and now love. As the sun rose on the day of their departure, Matt busily stowed away their belongings. His attention was caught by a familiar face, Stephanie, looking every bit as lively as he remembered, laughing and intertwined with a new companion. It wasn't jealousy that pained him, but recognition. The sparkle in her eyes, the infectious laughter, the allure, all that had once been his was now shared with another. Memories of nights spent talking, dreams woven together, and promises made played in his mind. Had it all been just a fleeting moment for her? Just a way to pass time? His thoughts were interrupted when Lila emerged from the cabin, her smile radiant and full of promise. Matt gave one last lingering look at the winding path that led deeper into the woods. With a deep breath, he climbed into the truck, ready to embark on a new journey with Lila by his side. Back home, Matt was excited to introduce Lila to his family. His parents welcomed her warmly, instantly feeling a connection to the kind-hearted woman their son had brought home. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue over the surroundings, Matt and his father, Ronan, found themselves sitting on the old wooden porch. The creaky swing swayed gently with the breeze, and memories of younger days played in their minds. "Dad," Matt began, hesitating slightly, "did you ever have your heart broken?" Ronan looked into the distance, his eyes reflecting years of wisdom and experiences. After a long pause, he smiled and said, "Matt, life is full of ups and downs. Yes, I've had my heart broken, more than once in fact. But every heartbreak taught me something. It taught me about resilience, about the importance of moving forward, and about the strength that comes from pain. It prepared me for the love I share with your mother, a love so profound that it eclipsed all past sorrows." Matt absorbed his father's words, feeling a weight lift from his heart. Ronan continued, "Every person we meet, every experience we have, shapes us in some way. Embrace the journey, my son, for every chapter has its purpose." The two sat in silence, lost in their thoughts, the words resonating deep within Matt. As night settled, they went inside, leaving behind the comforting embrace of the porch and the profound reflections it had borne witness to. With Lila by his side and the wisdom of his father in his heart, Matt was ready to embrace the next chapter of his life, wherever it might lead. Alan's phone buzzed with an unexpected notification, jolting him from his mid-morning routine. The alert was from the security system installed at his seldom-used summer house. The surveillance system had been a bundled deal, one of those offers too good to refuse. Alan had thought, why not, and decided to equip the summer house as well. It was a practical afterthought, a way to keep an eye on the property remotely. He had reasoned it might be useful for spotting the odd raccoon or stray cat that wandered too close to the house. But the camera feed now displayed a different scene, one that wrenched Alan's heart with an acute sense of distress. Alan, a self-made man, and his wife Caitlin had always been city dwellers. Their house in the city was more than comfortable. It was home. With his keen sense of financial stewardship, Alan was cautious with money, having clawed his way to a respectable fortune through grit and perseverance. The dream had always been to retire to the countryside one day, a fantasy of bucolic bliss where Alan, aged and wise, would pass his days in pastoral peace, possibly handing over the reins of his hard-earned business empire to a new generation. Yet life's unpredictable ebb had led them to this country house much sooner than planned. Sitting at his kitchen table, Alan replayed the footage, his mind racing with possibilities. "Anything wrong?" Caitlin's voice, warm with concern, broke his concentration. Alan snapped his laptop shut. "It's nothing to worry about, just a few work issues I need to sort out," he reassured. Caitlin gave a non-committal shrug and drifted away. Grasping his laptop more securely, Alan retreated to the solitude of the study. He watched the grainy figure pause, its movements deliberate. Caitlin might have pieced it together if she had known he was reviewing footage from the security cameras, but she remained blissfully unaware of their existence. That same evening, a rare quietude enveloped their house, allowing Alan to drift into reflection. As Alan watched his wife, he remembered her tales of the past, her dreams of domestic simplicity, evenings donned in sweatpants, indulging in scrambled eggs for dinner, and sharing the quiet end of the day with someone she loved. Yet despite her efforts, that level of intimacy and comfort had eluded her, leaving her feeling unfulfilled and inadequate. It was the raw honesty and determination in Caitlin's eyes that had captivated Alan when they first met. One memorable weekend, they ventured out on a hike, a shared adventure that reinforced their bond. As they descended the trail, a friendly offer from a stranger on an ATV was accepted without a second thought. But the joyride took a harrowing turn as the vehicle flipped on a precarious section of the path. Caitlin hit the ground with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs, Alan and the driver tumbling on top of her in a chaotic heap. "I need to go to the hospital," she gasped, pain radiating through her body. At the hospital, the severity of Caitlin's injuries came to light. Her pelvis fractured in multiple places, her shoulder broken. The next 6 weeks would confine her to a hospital bed, her world shrinking to the size of her recovery room. Friends circled around Caitlin, a rotating guard of love and support, including Mark, a childhood friend whose boyish features had matured into a rugged allure. It was during one of these evenings, as Mark kept vigil by her bedside, that he unveiled his long-concealed affection for her, a confession that left Caitlin reeling with surprise and a clandestine thrill. The following morning, as Alan walked in, bearing the sweetness of fresh fruits, his gaze fell upon Mark's flowers, and the air turned heavy with unspoken words. Caitlin, sensing the shift, was quick to affirm her commitment to Alan, even as a whisper of temptation brushed her consciousness, a whisper she silenced without hesitation. As time marched on, the day arrived for Caitlin to return home. Alan, ever the devoted partner, managed her transition with gentle care. Even when his own misfortune struck, a broken leg from a soccer accident, he found solace in Caitlin's willing embrace. It was in the dance of their mutual vulnerabilities, the exchange of care and comfort, that the depth of their connection truly revealed themselves. Their wedding had the charming simplicity of an intimate gathering. Caitlin's side was modest but familial. Her parents, her sister, and the bustle of nieces and nephews filled the space with warmth. Alan's side, however, told a different story. A handful of friends, close as brothers, but no blood relatives to speak of. This disparity was a silent specter at the feast, a topic shrouded in a tacit understanding that it was not open for discussion. Whenever Caitlin's curiosity bubbled to the surface, begging her to broach the subject of his absent family, Alan would offer a practiced smile and a gentle deflection. "I've never really had a big family," he once said, his voice laced with a finality that softly forbade further inquiries. It had been more than 6 years since Alan last spoke to his father, Ron. The estrangement had not been an abrupt severance, but the culmination of a myriad of painful episodes. It started with an argument with his stepmother. When Ron, Alan's father, had an affair with Amy while still married to Alan's mother, the betrayal shook the family's foundation. 8-year-old Alan, in a moment of pain and youthful indiscretion, had lashed out with an email to Amy that was unkind and raw. The sort of message only a child who doesn't grasp the full weight of adult complications could send. Alan often pondered whether Amy's coolness towards him was rooted in that long-ago message. It seemed unjust to him that he would be judged on the actions of his 8-year-old self, a boy reeling from his parents' turmoil. Alan's journey back to his father's life at 15 was not just a reunion, but a foray into a new world. His biological mother's mental health struggles had kept him at arm's length from Ron, but her passing, as tragic as it was, had reopened a door to a relationship long dormant. The initial meeting with Amy, after the period of mourning his mother, was a chance Alan embraced with a mix of trepidation and hope. He yearned for a maternal presence, a guiding hand, or at the very least, a friend in this woman who now shared his life. He made concerted efforts, gifts carefully chosen for the holidays, attempts to share activities with her, and even candid conversations where he laid bare his intentions. Despite Alan's earnest attempts at forming a connection, Amy's demeanor remained cold and distant. Her interactions with him were sparse and perfunctory, as if every word she spoke took a concerted effort. Whenever Alan entered the room, her discomfort was palpable. She would often behave as though she were the unwanted presence, an interloper in her own home despite the family's consistent reassurances to the contrary. "You know, we love having you here, Amy," Ron would say, his voice a blend of confusion and concern, observing the tension that seemed to cloud over the room. "I'm not so sure," Amy would murmur, her gaze flickering to Alan with a glint of unease. "Sometimes it just feels like I'm in the way." Alan witnessed these exchanges with a sinking heart. On more than one occasion, he overheard the hushed conversations, the soft cadence of his father's attempts at consolation. "Nobody thinks that, Amy. You're imagining it," he heard his father insist gently, yet Amy's response was to quietly slip out the door, leaving a silent void in her wake. This pattern became a painful norm, Amy retreating from the space Alan occupied, as if his very presence were an invisible barrier to her sense of belonging. Ron's visage would fall each time the front door closed behind her, a mixture of guilt and helplessness washing over him. Alan grappled with the situation, torn between his own desire for harmony and the unmistakable reality that his efforts were only driving a wedge further into the fragile structure of their blended family. During his college years, Alan's relationship with his stepmother grew increasingly strained, culminating in a particularly telling incident one 4th of July. Alan was visiting his father Ron, and upon learning that Amy was planning to visit her own parents, he inquired about her plans for the holiday fireworks. "Are you staying for the fireworks tonight, Amy?" Alan asked, trying to make polite conversation. Amy, perhaps misinterpreting the gesture or feeling put on the spot, replied with a sharp tinge of defensiveness in her voice. I was going to leave tomorrow, but since you're implying I should go now, I'll leave immediately. Despite protests from everyone insisting that wasn't what Alan meant and begging her to stay, Amy remained resolute and departed, leaving a wake of tension behind her. Alan's primary grievance with Amy was the possessiveness she exhibited over Ron's time. Whenever Ron shared moments with his son, Amy acted as if she were being betrayed. Her phone calls during their time together were laden with pointed remarks. Ron's phone would ring, and Amy's voice would come through the speaker, tinged with a faint cheerfulness. I'm learning to have fun without you, so don't hurry back on my account. Or her words would drip with sarcasm. Maybe you should take Alan to Mexico instead of me, like we planned. You two seem to have such a good time together. Alan couldn't fathom the depth of her jealousy. It reached a point where he felt like an unwelcome guest in his father's home. Ron, a pacifist by nature, recognized the tension but chose not to address it directly with Amy, maintaining a stance of non-confrontation that only exacerbated the situation. The last straw came on Father's Day that cut deep. Alan was not invited to spend the day with his father, a decision driven by Amy. Unable to hold back any longer, Alan confronted his father about Amy's behavior. In a heated exchange where emotions ran high, Alan expressed his bottled-up frustrations. She's pushing me out of your life, Dad. Can't you see that? Ron, his patience worn thin and perhaps feeling cornered, lashed back with words that left an indelible scar. You know, Alan, your whole attitude has been a disappointment to me. If you ever want to have a family of your own, you better learn to change. The hurt from that conversation created a rift that had not healed. It was the last time Alan spoke to his father, a painful memory that lingered. The year Alan and Caitlin got married unfurled as a series of decisive moments, each turn steering them closer to their shared destiny. Alan, steadfast in his career at a prominent company, was on the brink of ascending to a coveted promotion. However, fate took an unforeseen twist when his boss's superior appointed an outsider for the role. I can't believe they passed you over, Caitlin said one evening. Alan, with a determination in his eyes, replied, It's a sign, Caitlin. It's time I took the reins of my own destiny. And with that, he embarked on his own venture, the confines of their apartment serving as the cradle of his burgeoning business. Within months, his tireless work bore fruit, and he secured a modest office space to welcome his burgeoning clientele. Caitlin, in the throes of her final year of medical school, found herself juggling textbooks with business ledgers, offering unwavering support to Alan while navigating her own rigorous academic demands. Their evenings became a ritual of fleeting interactions, Alan arriving late, collapsing into bed, and rising with the sun, seeking the comfort of clean clothing and the prepared breakfast that awaited him. But the toll was manifesting. Sleep became a luxury, with nights often truncated to mere hours as Caitlin's routine morphed into a marathon of work and domesticity. Burnout loomed on her horizon, her resilience waning under the relentless pace. As his enterprise demanded even more of him, devouring weekends in its insatiable growth, Alan faced a crossroad. With the business gaining traction, he proposed a controversial pivot for Caitlin, abandoned her medical aspirations to become the cornerstone of their growing enterprise. With her internship on the horizon, the pressure intensified. The couple faced a painful decision. The reality of her having to abandon her studies to sustain the business became a somber possibility. We're building this for our future, Caitlin. Once we reach this next goal, I'll make sure you can go back to school, Alan assured her, but his eyes betrayed the fanaticism with which he pursued his business goals. Caitlin, torn between her dreams and her dedication to their shared success, found herself at the heart of their enterprise, a linchpin that Alan, in his pursuit of entrepreneurial triumph, had come to rely on perhaps too heavily. 5 years had seen Alan's venture burgeon into a thriving enterprise, with a staff roster of over 50. Caitlin, living in the lap of luxury, found herself at a crossroads of contentment and restlessness. Alan, ever the provider, assured her she didn't lift a finger, but Caitlin yearned for more than just the trappings of success. She longed for a sense of personal fulfillment. One tranquil evening, as they sat in their expansive living room, Caitlin turned to Alan with a quiet determination in her voice. "Honey, remember the promise we made during those grinding days of building the business? You said once things stabilized, I could return to my studies." Alan looked at her, his expression one of gentle confusion. "Baby, why dive back into that stress? We're financially secure. There's no need for you to worry about money anymore." "It's not about the money, Alan," Caitlin replied, her gaze steady and sincere. "It's about completing what I started. It's about me." Alan's voice softened, a mix of bewilderment and concern. "But baby, why can't you just enjoy the life we have built? Why can't you be happy with what we have?" Caitlin's response was a heavy sigh, her eyes reflecting a sea of unspoken thoughts. She left the room, leaving Alan perplexed and pondering her discontent. In the following days, Alan noticed a shift in Caitlin's demeanor. She, who once brimmed with ambition and zest, now moved through her days with a subdued air. She seemed to have relinquished her fiery spirit, and her constant presence at home, immersing herself in domesticity, struck Alan as peculiar. Alan, in a bid to lift her spirits, suggested, "Honey, why don't you take some time for yourself? A vacation, perhaps? What about Cancun?" Caitlin's response was swift and sharp. "I don't need another trip to Cancun, Alan. We've been there enough." Alan's anxiety surfaced, his voice tinged with frustration. "Then what is it that you want? Just tell me. You seem dissatisfied with everything. You don't want to travel. You don't seem happy here. Any other wife would be ecstatic with this life." Caitlin paused, her hands seizing their work as she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It's not about being like any other wife, Alan. It's about being me." This conversation marked a turning point, a gentle but firm assertion of Caitlin's needs, desires, and the individuality she felt slipping away amidst the grandeur of their shared success. One day, Caitlin smiled with a gentle resignation. "Alan, do you remember when we used to fantasize about owning a quaint house in the countryside?" Alan nodded, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "Of course I remember. But look at what we've already built here. A spacious home with an expansive backyard." "That's not quite what I meant," she clarified, taking a seat across from him, her eyes alight with a flicker of a long-lost dream. "I'm talking about a real country house, one nestled in a cozy village perhaps, shielded from the incessant pings of work emails and away from the digital world." He raised an eyebrow in mild amusement. "That's an unexpected desire, but if it's what you truly want, then yes, let's do it. I must warn you though, the responsibility of finding and refurbishing it would rest on your shoulders." With a peal of laughter, Caitlin leaned forward and planted a quick kiss on his cheek. "I wouldn't have it any other way." A mere week later, Caitlin burst into his office, her eyes gleaming with uncontainable excitement. "Alan, I've found your house. It's not just any house. It's embraced by a birch grove, with a serene river a mere stone throw away. You must see it for yourself." His wife's infectious enthusiasm carved through his usual reserve. It had been eons since he had witnessed that particular sparkle in her eyes, the one that reminded him of the vibrant woman he had fallen in love with. That weekend, they made the trip to the village. Standing before the property, Alan's practicality overshadowed his romanticism. The house stood silent and forlorn, a sturdy structure that time had forgotten. Noticing the return of that captivating sparkle in her eyes, Alan sighed in acquiescence. "All right, we'll buy the house. But remember, the refurbishing is your project. With the upcoming branch opening, I'll be swamped and won't be able to assist." Her response was to wrap him in an impulsive embrace. "Thank you. Just wait and see. Once I breathe new life into it, you'll fall in love with this place." 2 months flew by in a world of business meetings and late-night calls for Alan. Drained, he returned home, the weight of endless negotiations bearing down on him. He had a scant 48 hours to spend in the sanctuary of his home before the relentless pace of work summoned him again. Caitlin settled in beside him with an inviting warmth. "Alan, I want you to spend these next 2 days with me at our country retreat. I think it might just charm you." Initially, Alan felt a pull to decline, tempted by the lure of familiar comforts, but curiosity nudged him gently towards acceptance. As they arrived, the transformation of the house before him was remarkable. Caitlin had masterfully blended rustic allure with modern comforts in a way that was subtle yet strikingly effective. "Caitlin, this is amazing," Alan admitted, his eyes sweeping over the space. His wife flitted around, her presence bringing the house to life as she prepared their meal. Alan found himself imbued with a sense of vitality, a refreshing youthfulness. The weekend unfolded like a chapter from a storybook romance. There were shy glances from Caitlin, and within Alan a flicker of bewilderment ignited. He couldn't recall the last time their relationship shimmered with this kind of vitality. Come Monday, the city reclaimed them, and work ensnared Alan in its familiar grip. "Caitlin, I'll be away for a week," he mentioned casually, the tinge of routine coloring his voice. "I trust you'll be fine without me. There's some urgent matters I must attend to." Caitlin responded with a lightness that piqued his interest. "Oh, I'll simply retreat to our little sanctuary in the country." "Again? What is it that captures your attention there so?" he inquired, his curiosity laced with a hint of concern. She met his gaze, a trace of something like apprehension flickering in her eyes. "Just embracing the solitude and the natural beauty," she assured him. Throughout his business trip, Alan's thoughts wandered back to the country house and Caitlin's newfound vibrancy. It was uncanny, the transformation she underwent with each visit, emerging more radiant and content. Alan felt a tightness in his chest, a confluence of confusion and determination. Only half a year ago, Caitlin was adrift, but now she was awash with a newfound joy. Compelled to unravel this mystery, he bided his time. As soon as Caitlin left, he hastily gathered what he needed and made a beeline for the country house, driven by a mix of apprehension and resolve. Alan harbored a gnawing suspicion that Caitlin's solitary trips to the country house concealed more than mere solitude in nature. His mind raced with the unthinkable possibility of another presence, another person who might explain the radiance she seemed to gain from each visit. Her explanations, cloaked in ambiguity, did little to assuage his growing doubts. Driven by this fear, he surreptitiously installed hidden cameras throughout the house. His heart wrestled with the ethics of his actions as he departed, leaving behind the silent sentinels that would soon reveal the truth of Caitlin's retreats. As he sat in his hotel room, the weight of the day's meetings dissipated in anticipation of the footage that awaited him. Alan's fingers hovered over the laptop, a part of him recoiling at the invasion of privacy he had orchestrated. He considered abandoning this digital voyeurism and confronting Caitlin directly. Yet the lingering uncertainties propelled him forward. He needed to see what lay hidden within those walls. The video was coarse, but Caitlin was unmistakable as she settled into the familiar space. Her actions mundane until the footage betrayed her secrecy. Alan's heart sank as a middle-aged man entered the frame, sharing an embrace with Caitlin that seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of friendship. The inability to discern the man's face only fueled Alan's imagination and pain. Rushing back from his business engagements, Alan's mind was a maelstrom of betrayal and confusion. He found Caitlin alone, a scene starkly different from the one seared into his memory by the camera's unblinking eye. Her puzzled gaze followed him as he moved restlessly through the house, a futile search for evidence of the intruder. Finally, sitting beside her, he confronted the silent question between them with digital proof. "Caitlin, I know everything. What's going on here?" His voice was a tight wire, strained and barely holding. Caitlin's gaze dropped, the weight of discovery anchoring her eyes to the floor, the reality of her secret unraveling before them both. She was swathed in guilt for keeping Alan at bay from the hidden chapters of their life. Alan felt the maelstrom of emotions as Caitlin began to apologize. The more she spoke, the deeper the confusion seemed to burrow into his understanding of the situation. His mind, tangled in the web of betrayal he had spun, struggled to make sense of her expansion. "You had to contact him? Contact who?" The question was like a fissure in the dam of his comprehension, through which the truth began to trickle. Caitlin's eyes met Alan's, a clear stream of sincerity flowing from her. The dawning realization that their thoughts had been parallel lines, close but never meeting, prompted a heavy sigh from her. "Alan, it seems we've got our wires crossed. Let me clarify everything. I love you, honey, and I would never..." Her attempt to smooth the creases of misunderstanding was interrupted as an elderly lady entered, the fragrance of fresh flowers preceding her. The room felt warmer with her presence, a soothing balm to the palpable tension. "Hi, Mrs. McGee," Caitlin greeted, her voice in gentle chime in the sudden influx of company. "This is my husband, Alan." Alan looked from his wife to the new people, asking a question without speaking. Soon after, the man from the video walked in. He looked just like Alan's dad. Overwhelmed by the unfolding scenario, Alan struggled to reconcile his emotions. Here stood the man he had deeply adored, yet simultaneously resented for the wounds of the past. "Hello, Alan." Ron's familiar voice filled the space, bridging the gap between the son's bewilderment and the father's calm presence. Caitlin, driven by a longing for a complete family, had sought out Ron, who had been living in solitude. Her first encounter with Ron left an indelible mark on her heart. Discovering him in a state of neglect, ravaged by illness and the solitude imposed by his ex-wife's departure, she felt compelled to act. Ron's tales of estrangement from Alan, laced with remorse for past wrongs, resonated with her deeply. Ron acknowledged that he had been unwittingly ensnared by his ex-wife's manipulative tactics. She had spun a web of lies about their son Alan, falsely demonizing him and creating a rift between him and Ron. When the veil of deceit was finally lifted, Ron was left in ruins, mourning the irreversible estrangement from his son. He also discovered that Amy had another son, which shed some light on her possible animosity towards Alan. Time had moved on since their divorce, yet the repercussions of the past lingered. Caitlin's portrayal of the person Alan had matured into moved Ron deeply, his emotions manifesting in a stream of tears. He earnestly requested that she care for Alan and shield him from harm. Carrying the weight of his former misjudgments, Ron beseeched Caitlin to withhold the details of his plight, believing himself undeserving of facing Alan after all that had transpired. When Caitlin offered a hand of support, Ron's resignation was clear. His belief that Alan harbored resentment was a barrier he wasn't willing to cross. Caitlin transported Ron to the tranquility of a country house, promising to uphold a solemn vow of silence towards Alan. As she stepped into the role of Ron's caregiver, she was determined to nurse him back to independence. The country abode, surrounded by the serene whispers of nature, became a haven for Ron's convalescence as Caitlin devoted herself to his recovery, guiding him towards regaining his strength and autonomy. As Ron regained his mobility, he began to engage in various household activities, finding solace in the routine and simplicity of daily tasks. Unbeknownst to him, it was during these moments of domesticity that Alan glimpsed his father through the lens of a security camera. Caitlin and Ron's partnership flourished beyond the walls of their retreat. They became guardians of well-being for their elderly neighbors, weaving a fabric of care that blanketed the community. Caitlin found solace and significance in this labor of love, a poignant reminder of her intrinsic value. Ron stood in front of his son, looking very sorry and humble. "Alan, my boy, I'm really sorry for all the hurt I've caused before, and for coming back so unexpectedly. Your wife, she's been my savior. If you want, I'll go away and not disturb your life." In the silent communion that followed, Alan's gaze lingered on Caitlin, seeing her not just as his partner, but as the architect of reconciliation. The weight of years seemed to lift in that instant. Alan stood somewhat aloof amidst the hum of activity in the country house. The air was filled with the chatter of the neighbors and the clinking of teacups. Ron, agile and attentive, was in his element, fetching items for Caitlin, who was the day's quiet orchestrator. It was a dance of quiet understanding between them, and as Alan watched them, an epiphany slowly washed over him. His voice was loud and full of regret. "Caitlin, I'm really sorry. I've been the bad one here, only thinking about myself and what I need, not caring about you. I didn't see the truth, and I wrongly didn't trust you. Can you forgive me? If you want, you can work here all the time." Caitlin's eyes met his with a mixture of warmth and mischief. "That's a generous offer, but it's not feasible, unfortunately." "Is it because you're upset with me?" Alan's voice held a tremor of concern. "A bit, yes," she admitted, "but mostly because I won't have the time. Full-time work isn't in the cards for me for, say, the next 3 years or so." Confusion played across Alan's face. A mix of hope and disbelief flickered in Alan's eyes as realization dawned. Caitlin, embracing him tightly, whispered, "Remember those 2 magical days here? They were more than just a rekindling. Alan, we're going to have a baby." The news struck Alan with the force of a revelation, almost staggering him. He gently held Caitlin back, searching her eyes for certainty. "Are you serious? Absolutely certain?" Her laughter was like music, dispelling any shadows of doubt. "Completely sure. The doctor confirmed it. We're gonna be parents." In a swirl of elation, he lifted her into a joyous twirl, their laughter mingling with the continued buzz of the gathering, a symphony of new beginnings. Alan's motion ceased, and as he steadied himself from the exuberant twirl, his eyes sought out his father's. In the depths of Ron's gaze, there was a clear well of remorse, an unspoken apology that resonated with the heavy silence that filled the room momentarily. Alan had spent years entangled in a web of resentment, but now, as he glanced at Caitlin, his perspective shifted. There she stood, the architect of reunions and revelations, the woman who had gently unraveled the knotted past with her compassion. Gratitude welled up in him, a silent hymn of thanks for the incredible partner fate had handed him, a partner who had not only become his heart's compass, but had also inadvertently steered them towards this moment of familial healing. With the past grievances that had long cast a shadow on their relationship momentarily quieted by the potential of forgiveness, Alan moved towards his father. "I spent years wishing for understanding, Dad," he said, his voice carrying the weight of those silent years. "Maybe it's time we both tried to understand each other." Ron, visibly moved by the gesture, nodded, his usual composure giving way to a more tender vulnerability. "I'd like that, Alan, more than anything." Caitlin's presence, a beacon of patience and love, bridged the gap between father and son. Her gentle influence had sown the seeds of reconciliation, and now those seeds were sprouting, tender shoots of hope breaking through the hardened soil of their shared history. Alan felt the transformation not just in the room but within himself. He had been poised on the precipice of becoming a father, and now he was rediscovering what it meant to be a son. The dual revelation was both humbling and profound. As the day wore on, the country house buzzed with activity and conversation. Neighbors came and went, each leaving behind words of encouragement and shared happiness. In the waning light of the day, as the guests departed, the trio, Alan, Caitlin, and Ron, sat together in a reflective silence, each lost in their thoughts, yet connected by the unspoken bond that had been strengthened today.
It all started with a chilling accusation. "That's the punishment for stealing my dad from me." Kelly's words echoed in my ears as she dragged me toward the basement. I struggled to resist, but Kelly, being younger and stronger, overpowered me. My heart pounded as she shoved me into the dark, cold space. The door slammed shut and I was left alone in the eerie silence. The basement was damp and musty, with an unsettling chill that seeped into my bones. As the darkness closed in around me, panic began to set in. I was trapped with no way out. My mind raced with thoughts of what Kelly had just done. Why was she so angry? How had our relationship become so twisted? But before I could dwell on these questions, I felt a small object pressing against my thigh. My hand instinctively reached into my pocket, and I realized that my phone was still with me. My name is Olivia Anderson, and at 45 years old, I never imagined finding myself in such a terrifying situation. I work as an administrative assistant, a job that's not too demanding but keeps me busy and content. My life was simple, predictable, and honestly, quite fulfilling. I had a stable career and colleagues who were more like friends, yet despite all this, one thing weighed heavily on my mind. I wasn't married. For years, I watched as my friends found their soulmates, settled down, and built lives together. Each wedding invitation brought a mix of joy and envy. I feared growing old alone, with no one to share my life with. That fear gnawed at me, even as I tried to bury it under work and social gatherings. Then, one day, my life took a turn when I met James Anderson. James was 9 years older than me, charming and kind. He worked for one of our client companies, and our paths crossed often due to work. At first, we were cautious, but gradually, we grew closer. What started as professional interactions soon blossomed into something more. We began dating, and after a few years, we decided to get married. It felt like a dream come true, a chance to finally have the family I had longed for. But this dream came with challenges. James had a daughter from his previous marriage, a 17-year-old named Kelly. From the beginning, Kelly was reserved and distant. She adored her father and clung to him whenever she could. I hoped that over time, Kelly and I would grow closer, that we would form a bond and become a family. But that was just wishful thinking. After the wedding, I moved into the house James shared with Kelly. I left my job to become a homemaker, dedicating myself to making our home a warm and welcoming place. I cooked balanced meals, kept the house spotless, and did everything I could to make life easier for James and Kelly. But no matter how hard I tried, Kelly kept her distance. At first, I chalked it up to her age. Teenagers are known for being moody and rebellious, right? But as the days turned into weeks and then months, Kelly's coldness didn't waver. She ignored my attempts to connect, answering my questions with monosyllables or not at all. The more I tried, the more she seemed to push me away. The only time Kelly seemed at ease was when she was with her cat, Oliver. Oliver was a chubby, sneaky feline who had been with James for years. He was Kelly's constant companion, and I often found her petting him in silence. I envied the ease with which she bonded with the cat, while I struggled to even get her to acknowledge my presence. Time passed, and despite my best efforts, the distance between Kelly and me only grew. 5 years went by, and though we lived under the same roof, we remained strangers. I had no idea what Kelly liked to eat, what her hobbies were, or what she dreamed of. The only thing I knew was that she adored Oliver, and that was a connection I couldn't seem to replicate. Then one day, out of the blue, Kelly spoke to me. I was startled. This was the first time she had initiated a conversation. "How long are you planning to stay in this house?" she asked, her tone sharp. I was taken aback. "What do you mean? How long are you going to stay here? Can you leave soon?" "You're in the way," she said bluntly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had tried so hard to make this house a home, to be a part of this family, and now Kelly was telling me to leave? I was at a loss for words. As I stood there stunned, Kelly continued, "I love my dad. It was just the two of us before you came along. I can't stand you being here, pretending to be my mother. I wanted to say something to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think was, how had it come to this? What had I done to make Kelly hate me so much? Kelly's next words cut even deeper. I thought if I ignored you long enough, you'd get the hint and leave. But you're still here, acting like everything's fine. You're not my mother, and you'll never be. So just go. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had tried so hard to be kind, to be patient, but nothing I did seemed to matter. Kelly's words echoed in my mind long after she walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen. From that day on, Kelly's treatment of me grew even harsher. She criticized my cooking, mocked my attempts to make conversation, and made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with me. It was like living with a stranger who resented my very presence. The worst part was that Kelly put on a facade in front of James. Whenever he was around, she acted sweet and polite, praising my cooking and pretending to be the perfect daughter. But as soon as he was out of earshot, the insults and coldness returned. I felt trapped in a nightmare, with no way to escape. I wanted to talk to James about it, to tell him what was really going on, but every time I tried, I lost my nerve. James was always busy with work, and I didn't want to burden him with my problems. So I kept quiet, hoping that somehow things would get better. But they didn't. 6 years after we got married, Kelly graduated from high school and started working at a company nearby. Around the same time, James began taking more frequent business trips. At first, he was only gone for a few days, but soon his trips stretched to weeks at a time. With James away, Kelly's behavior became even more unbearable. She criticized everything I did, from the way I cleaned the house to the meals I prepared. Every day, she found something new to complain about, and her words cut deeper and deeper. One day, I reached my breaking point. Kelly had just insulted my cooking again, leaving her meal untouched and storming off to pet Oliver. I couldn't take it anymore. "Just get out!" I yelled, my voice trembling with anger. "You're always telling me to leave, but maybe it's you who should go. You have a job, you have money, why don't you just move out and live on your own?" Kelly was shocked. She wasn't used to me talking back. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, but then her face twisted in anger. "What did you say?" she spat, her eyes narrowing. "You can't just kick me out. This is my house, too." "Then stop treating me like a stranger," I shouted back. "I'm tired of being your punching bag. If you can't stand me, then maybe it's time you moved on." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, Kelly lunged at me, grabbing my arm and squeezing it painfully. "Ouch," I cried, trying to pull away, but Kelly's grip was too strong. She dragged me out of the kitchen and down the hall, ignoring my protests. "Let go of me," I yelled, but Kelly didn't listen. She pulled me toward the basement, her face set in a determined expression. Before I could react, she shoved me inside and slammed the door shut. I was left in the darkness, stunned and terrified. What was she going to do? How long would she leave me here? My heart raced as I pounded on the door, pleading for Kelly to let me out. But there was no response. In the cold, dark basement, I started to feel sick. My head spun with fear and confusion. I couldn't believe what was happening. Kelly had locked me up like a criminal, all because she hated me so much. What had I done to deserve this? As the hours passed, my panic grew. I tried to think of a way out, but the basement was solidly built, with no windows or escape routes. The walls closed in around me, and I felt like I was suffocating. Then, I remembered the phone in my pocket. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and quickly dialed my friend Linda's number. "Linda, it's Olivia," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help." Linda was at my house within minutes. She pried open the basement door and helped me out, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, guiding me to her car. I nodded, but I couldn't stop shaking. "Kelly, she locked me in there," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what she was thinking." Linda shook her head. "Let's get you out of here," she said, starting the car. "You can stay with me until James gets back." As we drove away, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I was safe for now, but what would happen when James found out? Would he believe me? Would Kelly try to turn him against me? When we reached Linda's house, I sent James a message, explaining what had happened. A few hours later, he called me, his voice filled with concern. "Olivia, are you okay? I'm coming home right now." "James, you don't have to—" "No, I want to," he insisted. "I'll be there in a few hours. Just stay with Linda until I get there." True to his word, James arrived later that night. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were filled with worry. "Olivia, I'm so sorry," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I should have been there. I should have known something was wrong." "It's not your fault," I said, trying to hold back tears. "Kelly's been hiding this from you. I didn't want to worry you, but I can't take it anymore." James nodded, his expression grim. "We need to talk to Kelly. This can't go on." The next day, we returned home, Garzrania bracing ourselves for the confrontation with Kelly. When she arrived, she looked surprised to see James there. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," James said, his voice stern. "Kelly, what you did to Olivia was unacceptable." Kelly's face twisted in defiance. "She deserved it. She stole you from me." "That's no excuse," James replied, his voice firm. "You put her life in danger, Kelly. Do you understand how serious this is?" Kelly's defiance faltered, but she still tried to justify herself. "I just wanted her to leave. I never meant to hurt her." "But you did," I said quietly, stepping forward. "Kelly, I never wanted to replace your mother. I just wanted us to be a family. But you've made it clear that you don't want that." Tears filled Kelly's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "So what now? Are you going to kick me out?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Kelly, I love you, but you can't stay here if you're going to keep hurting Olivia. You need to get help. Maybe some time apart will help you see things more clearly." Kelly stared at him, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "You're choosing her over me." "I'm choosing what's best for everyone," James said gently. "Kelly, I want you to get better, to find a way to be happy. But that won't happen if you stay here and keep lashing out." After a long silence, Kelly finally nodded. "Fine, I'll go. But don't expect me to forgive either of you." With that, she turned and walked out of the house, leaving us standing there in stunned silence. The tension that had hung over us for years seemed to dissipate, replaced by a heavy sadness. James and I spent the next few days in a state of shock. We had hoped for a resolution, but instead, we were left with a broken family. Kelly moved into a small apartment nearby, and though James kept in touch with her, the distance between us all was palpable. Life gradually returned to a new normal. James and I focused on rebuilding our relationship, finding comfort in the quiet moments we shared. Oliver, sensing the change, became even more affectionate, curling up beside us as we sat on the sofa in the evenings. One day, as we sat watching the sunset, James turned to me and said, "Thank you for staying strong, Olivia. I know this hasn't been easy." "It hasn't been easy for you either," I replied, squeezing his hand. "But we're in this together. We'll get through it." As the weeks turned into months, we slowly began to heal. Kelly reached out to us occasionally, apologizing for her behavior and updating us on her life. She started seeing a counselor, and though there was still a long way to go, it was a step in the right direction. The house felt lighter without the constant tension, and James and I found ourselves rediscovering the joy of being together. We took long walks, planned weekend trips, and spent lazy afternoons just talking and laughing. It was like a second honeymoon, a chance to rebuild our lives and our love. Though the pain of the past lingered, we were determined to move forward. We had faced a storm and come out stronger on the other side. And with each passing day, the future looked a little brighter.
Die Nachricht erreichte mich um 15:43 Uhr. Ein gewöhnlicher Dienstagnachmittag verwandelte sich in den Moment, der mein Leben in 2 Hälften teilte. Das davor und das danach. Ich saß in meinem Auto vor der Sparkasse, wo ich gerade die Geschäftsbücher für den Monat abgeschlossen hatte. Familienzeit mit den Liebsten, las ich unter dem Foto. Daniel, mein Mann seit 20 Jahren, lächelte in die Kamera. Sein Arm lag um eine schlanke Brünette, deren Gesicht ich kannte. Vanessa aus der Marketingabteilung. Zwischen ihnen stand ein kleiner Junge, vielleicht 4 Jahre alt, mit Daniels charakteristischer Nase. Meine Hände zitterten nicht. Sie waren völlig ruhig, als ich das Handy weglegte und den Motor startete. Die Ruhe war unnatürlich wie die Stille vor einem Sturm. Ich fuhr direkt nach Hause, parkte in der Einfahrt unseres Stadthauses und wartete. Um 18:15 Uhr kam Daniel. Seine Schritte auf dem Kiesweg klangen wie immer. Der Schlüssel drehte sich im Schloss wie an jedem anderen Tag. Er pfiff sogar leise vor sich hin. »Jana?« Er stellte seine Aktentasche ab. »Riecht gut hier. Was gibt's zum... Wie alt ist er?« Meine Stimme klang fremd in meinen eigenen Ohren. Daniel erstarrte in der Bewegung. Seine Augen huschten zu meinem Gesicht, dann zum Handy in meiner Hand. »Wer?« »Dein Sohn. Der kleine Junge auf dem Foto mit dir und Vanessa.« Er setzte sich schwer auf einen Küchenstuhl. »Keine Ausreden, keine Lügen mehr.« 4. Er wird nächsten Monat 5. Die Mathematik war simpel. Emily war damals 14 gewesen. Ich hatte Überstunden gemacht, um ihre Privatschule zu finanzieren, während Daniel eine zweite Familie gründete. »Wie praktisch«, sagte ich und war überrascht von der Kälte in meiner Stimme. »Eine Frau für die Buchhaltung, eine für das Vergnügen. Es ist nicht so einfach, Jana. Vanessa und ich. Spar dir die Erklärungen.« Ich stand auf. »Emily wird in 1 Stunde von ihrem Volleyballtraining zurück sein. Du wirst ihr selbst erklären müssen, warum ihr kleiner Halbbruder älter ist als deine Affäre.« Als ich die Treppe hinaufging, hörte ich ihn meinen Namen rufen. Aber die Jana, die er kannte, die geduldige, verständnisvolle, verzeihende Jana, die gab es nicht mehr. In mir wuchs etwas Neues heran, etwas Hartes und Unnachgiebiges. Und es hungerte nach Gerechtigkeit. Emily kam nicht zum Abendessen. Stattdessen piepte mein Handy mit einer kurzen Nachricht. »Bin bei Papa und Vanessa. Sie haben mich zum Essen eingeladen. Keine Sorge, komme später.« Keine Sorge, als hätte ich in den letzten 24 Stunden irgendetwas anderes getan. Ich stand in meiner Küche, starrte auf den gedeckten Tisch für 2 und spürte, wie sich meine Fingernägel in meine Handflächen gruben. Das Lasagneblech im Ofen wurde kalt, genau wie mein Herz. Um 22:13 Uhr hörte ich den Schlüssel in der Tür. Emily schlich herein. Ihr langes, dunkles Haar glänzte im Schein der Straßenlaterne, die durchs Fenster schien. »Es tut mir leid, dass ich nicht Bescheid gesagt habe«, sagte sie, aber ihre Stimme klang nicht wirklich bedauernd. »Vanessa hat diese amazing Penthouse-Wohnung, Mom. Du hättest den Ausblick sehen sollen. Setz dich!« Ich deutete auf den Küchenstuhl. »Wir müssen reden. Mom, ich bin müde. Können wir das nicht... Setz dich!« Sie seufzte theatralisch, ließ sich aber auf den Stuhl fallen. »Was ist denn so wichtig? Weißt du, dass du einen kleinen Bruder hast?« Emily erstarrte. Ihre Augen weiteten sich kurz, dann entspannte sich ihr Gesicht in einer Weise, die mir fremd war. »Ja, ich weiß. Er heißt Liam. Er ist süß.« Die Worte trafen mich wie Schläge. »Wie lange weißt du es schon?« »Ein paar Monate.« Sie zuckte mit den Schultern. »Papa meinte, er würde dir davon erzählen, wenn die Zeit reif ist.« »Die Zeit reif ist?« Meine Stimme war kaum mehr als ein Flüstern. »Er hat 4 Jahre lang ein Doppelleben geführt. Mom, das ist kompliziert. Vanessa versteht Papa einfach besser. Sie ist in der gleichen Branche, sie ist 12 Jahre jünger als er und war seine Assistentin, als die Affäre begann.« »Gott, Mom!« Emily stand auf. »Musst du immer so verbittert sein? Kein Wunder, dass Papa...« Sie brach ab, aber die unausgesprochenen Worte hingen zwischen uns wie Gift. »Dass Papa was? Sich eine jüngere Version gesucht hat? Eine, die nicht zu beschäftigt damit war, unsere Familie zu ernähren?« »Das habe ich nicht gesagt.« Emily griff nach ihrer Tasche. »Ich schlafe heute bei Lukas. Hier ist es mir zu eng.« Als die Tür hinter ihr ins Schloss fiel, nahm ich mein Handy. Mit zitternden Fingern wählte ich die Nummer meines Vaters. »Papa? Ich brauche deine Hilfe.« Und zwar nicht nur als Vater, sondern auch als Geschäftsmann. Vaters Büro roch nach Leder und Erfolg. Er saß hinter seinem massiven Schreibtisch, während ich ihm die Unterlagen präsentierte, die ich in den letzten 3 Tagen zusammengetragen hatte. Bright Horizons ist nur die Spitze des Eisbergs, erklärte ich. Daniel und Vanessa haben ein Netzwerk von Scheinfirmen aufgebaut. Die Immobiliendeals, die sie abschließen, pure Geldwäsche. Thomas nahm seine Lesebrille ab. Woher hast du diese Information? Ich war 20 Jahre lang Daniels Buchhalterin. Ein bitteres Lächeln huschte über mein Gesicht. Er hat nie verstanden, dass ich mehr sah als nur Zahlen. Das Telefon auf seinem Schreibtisch summte. Entschuldige, sagte er und nahm den Anruf an. Seine Miene verdunkelte sich. Wann? Verstehe, nein, sagen Sie noch nichts. Ich kümmere mich darum. Was ist los? Emily hat sich bei Bright Horizons als Praktikantin beworben. Daniel hat sie eingestellt. Die Worte trafen mich wie ein Schlag. Das kann er nicht! Doch, kann er! Sie ist volljährig. Er lehnte sich vor. Aber das ist nicht alles. Einer meiner Kontakte bei der Börsenaufsicht hat mir gerade gesteckt, dass gegen Bright Horizons ermittelt wird. Wenn Emily dort arbeitet, wenn alles auffliegt. Ich sprang auf. Ich muss mit ihr reden. Jana. Seine Stimme hatte diesen Ton, den ich aus meiner Kindheit kannte. Wenn du jetzt zu ihr gehst, wird sie sich nur noch mehr verschließen. Du musst klüger vorgehen. Sie ist meine Tochter. Und sie ist verblendet von der glamourösen Fassade, die Daniel und diese Vanessa aufgebaut haben. Er stand auf, kam um den Schreibtisch herum. Lass uns einen anderen Weg gehen. Welchen? Du kennst die Schwachstellen in Daniels Büchern. Wir könnten... Nein. Ich schüttelte den Kopf. Wenn wir das tun, verliere ich Emily für immer. In diesem Moment vibrierte mein Handy. Eine Nachricht von einer unbekannten Nummer. Ich weiß, was in Bright Horizons wirklich läuft. Treffen Sie mich heute um 20 Uhr im Parkhaus der Stadtgalerie. Kommen Sie allein. V. Vanessa, flüsterte ich. Vater las die Nachricht über meine Schulter. Das könnte eine Falle sein. Oder meine Chance, Emily zu retten. Ich steckte das Handy weg. Manchmal muss man dem Teufel in die Augen sehen, um einen Engel zu beschützen. Er seufzte schwer. Dann lass uns wenigstens einen Plan machen. Einen, bei dem du nicht allein in die Höhle des Löwen gehst. Das Parkhaus der Stadtgalerie war um diese Uhrzeit fast leer. Meine Schritte hallten zwischen den Betonsäulen wider, während ich zur vereinbarten Ebene ging. Vaters Worte klangen noch in meinen Ohren. Lass den Peilsender an. Beim kleinsten Anzeichen von Gefahr greifen wir ein. Vanessa wartete bereits. Ihre schlanke Silhouette lehnte gegen einen schwarzen Mercedes. Als ich näher kam, sah ich die dunklen Ringe unter ihren Augen, die das perfekte Make-up nicht ganz verbergen konnte. »Danke, dass Sie gekommen sind«, sagte sie leise. »Warum wollten Sie mich sprechen?« »Weil Emily in Gefahr ist.« Sie zog einen USB-Stick aus ihrer Handtasche. »Daniel, er ist nicht der Mann, für den Sie ihn halten, für den ich ihn hielt.« Das wurde mir in letzter Zeit ziemlich klar. »Nein, Sie verstehen nicht!« Ihre Stimme zitterte. »Die Immobiliendeals bei Bright Horizons? Das ist nur die Oberfläche. Er hat Verbindungen zu Leuten, gefährlichen Leuten. Und jetzt zieht er Emily damit rein.« Ich spürte, wie sich mein Magen zusammenzog. »Was meinen Sie damit? Das Praktikum? Es ist kein Zufall. Er braucht jemanden mit einem sauberen Namen für bestimmte Transaktionen. Emily ist perfekt. Jung, intelligent, unverdächtig. Und Sie sagen mir das, weil ich schwanger bin.« Ihre Hand wanderte zu ihrem Bauch. »Und weil ich gesehen habe, was mit der letzten Person passiert ist, die zu viele Fragen gestellt hat.« Ein Motorengeräusch echote durch das Parkhaus. Vanessas Augen weiteten sich. »Er sollte nicht hier sein. Nicht jetzt. Wer? Nehmen Sie den Stick. Alles ist darauf. Konten, Termine, Namen. Aber Sie haben ihn nicht von mir.« Sie drückte mir den USB-Stick in die Hand und eilte zu ihrem Wagen. Ich glitt hinter eine Säule, als ein zweiter Mercedes einrollte. Daniel stieg aus, sein Gesicht war eine Maske kalter Wut. »Was machst du hier, Vanessa?« Ich habe nur... Wurde dir nicht klargemacht, dass du die Stadt verlassen sollst?« Ihre Antwort ging im Quietschen von Reifen unter. Ich wagte einen Blick um die Säule. Ein dritter Wagen war erschienen, dunkel und fensterlos. Der USB-Stick in meiner Hand fühlte sich plötzlich bleischwer an. Ich aktivierte den Peilsender in meiner Tasche, das vereinbarte Notsignal. Während ich mich zurückzog, hörte ich Vanessas unterdrückten Schrei. Dies war keine Familientragödie mehr. Dies war etwas viel Dunkleres. Der USB-Stick enthielt mehr als nur Beweise für Geldwäsche. Während ich die Dateien durchging, wurde mir übel. Immobilienbetrug war nur die Fassade für ein Netzwerk aus Erpressung, Bestechung und Schlimmerem. Namen von Politikern, Richtern, Geschäftsleuten, alle verstrickt in Daniels Machenschaften. Schüttelte den Kopf. Du bleibst hier und sicherst die Daten. Wenn mir etwas zustößt, gehst du damit zur Polizei. Im Aufzug von Bright Horizons spürte ich, wie sich meine Nackenhaare aufstellten. Das Untergeschoss war still. Zu still für ein Gebäude, in dem normalerweise rund um die Uhr gearbeitet wurde. Die Tür zum Archiv war nur angelehnt. Als ich sie aufschob, sah ich Emily. Sie saß an einem Schreibtisch, ihr Gesicht im bläulichen Schein eines Computerbildschirms. Emily? Sie drehte sich um. Tränen liefen über ihre Wangen. Es tut mir so leid, Mom. Die Tür fiel hinter mir ins Schloss. Daniel trat aus dem Schatten, in der Hand einen Ordner. Weißt du, sagte er ruhig, ich habe mich immer gefragt, warum du nie Fragen gestellt hast. All die Jahre. Aber jetzt verstehe ich. Du wusstest es die ganze Zeit, nicht wahr? Was hast du mit Vanessa gemacht? Sie hat eine Auszeit genommen. Er lächelte dünn. Genau wie du eine nehmen wirst. Es sei denn, er hielt den Ordner hoch. Du unterschreibst diese Papiere. Ein kompletter Verzicht auf alle Ansprüche. Emily bleibt bei mir. Ich sah zu meiner Tochter. In ihren Augen stand nackte Angst. Und wenn nicht? Dann erfährt die Polizei von deiner Rolle bei unseren kreativen Buchführungspraktiken der letzten 20 Jahre. Ich nahm den Stift, den Daniel mir hinhielt. Die Papiere vor mir verschwammen, während Emily leise schluchzte. Du verstehst das nicht, sagte ich ruhig. All diese Jahre habe ich nicht geschwiegen, weil ich Angst hatte. Ich habe geschwiegen, weil ich Beweise sammelte. Daniels Lächeln flackerte. Was? Jede Transaktion, jede Unterschrift, jedes Treffen. Ich legte den Stift weg. Glaubst du wirklich, eine Buchhalterin mit 20 Jahren Erfahrung würde keine Rückversicherung anlegen? Ein Schatten huschte über sein Gesicht. Du bluffst. Bin ich das? Ich zog mein Handy heraus. Soll ich dir zeigen, was Vanessa mir gegeben hat? Oder die Aufzeichnungen der letzten Vorstandssitzung, wo du die Sondervereinbarungen mit Richter Hartmann besprochen hast? Er bewegte sich so schnell, dass ich kaum reagieren konnte. Seine Hand schloss sich um meinen Hals, drückte zu. Wo sind die Beweise? Papa hat alles, keuchte ich. Wenn mir etwas zustößt, dann stirbt er eben auch. Nein! Emily sprang auf. Dad, bitte! Du tust ihr weh! Bleib, wo du bist! Er verstärkte den Druck. Deine Mutter muss verstehen, dass man sich nicht mit mir anlegt. Schwarze Punkte tanzten vor meinen Augen. Ich hörte Emily schreien, dann das Krachen einer Tür. Lass sie los! Lukas Stimme. Ein Tumult. Der Druck an meinem Hals verschwand. Als meine Sicht sich klärte, sah ich Lukas, der Daniel am Boden festhielt. Emily stand an der Tür, ihr Handy in der zitternden Hand. Sie hatte Lukas heimlich angerufen, als Daniel mich bedroht hatte. Sirenen heulten in der Ferne. Du dumme Kleine! Daniel kämpfte sich hoch, sein perfektes Image zerbrochen. Ihr habt keine Ahnung, mit wem ihr euch anlegt. Doch, das haben wir! Emily trat neben mich. Mom hatte recht. Du bist ein Monster! Die Sirenen kamen näher. Daniel lachte. Ein kaltes, berechnendes Lachen. Ihr denkt, das ist vorbei? Das ist erst der Anfang. Meine Partner werden... Deine Partner? Eine neue Stimme? Vanessa stand in der Tür, blass aber aufrecht. Hinter ihr Thomas und mehrere Polizisten. Du meinst die Partner, die gerade verhaftet werden? Daniels Gesicht wurde aschfahl. In diesem Moment erkannte ich, dass der wahre Kampf erst begann. Denn ein verwundetes Raubtier war am gefährlichsten. Die Gerichtsverhandlung war der perfekte Ort für Daniels letzten Schachzug. Während ich aussagte, spürte ich seinen durchdringenden Blick. Er lächelte, als würde er etwas wissen, das ich nicht wusste. Dann kam der Moment, den er vorbereitet hatte. Frau Weber? Sagte sein Anwalt. Stimmt es, dass Sie jahrelang die Bücher für Bright Horizons geführt haben? Ja. Und Sie wollen uns glauben machen, dass Sie von den Unregelmäßigkeiten nichts wussten? Einspruch! Mein Anwalt sprang auf, aber Daniel hatte bereits sein Ass ausgespielt. Sein Anwalt hielt ein Dokument hoch. Dies ist eine Unterschrift von Frau Weber, die persönlich mehrere der fraglichen Überweisungen autorisiert hat. Das Gericht verstummte. Emily, die in der ersten Reihe saß, wurde blass. Diese Unterschrift, sagte ich ruhig, ist gefälscht. Daniel lachte leise. Beweis es! Ich zog einen USB-Stick aus meiner Tasche. Das werde ich. Sein Lächeln gefror. Dieser Stick enthält Videoaufnahmen aus Ihrem Büro, Herr Weber. Von dem Abend, als Sie und Ihr Assistent diese Unterschriften gefälscht haben. Das ist unmöglich! Die Reinigungskraft, sagte Vanessa von ihrem Platz aus. Sie haben nie auf die Reinigungskraft geachtet, oder? Die ich eingestellt habe. Die jeden Abend ihre kleine Kamera laufen ließ. Daniel sprang auf. Sie lügen alle. Nein, Dad! Emily stand auf. Du bist der Lügner. Ich habe dich gesehen an dem Abend im Archiv. Du hast die Dokumente gefälscht, während du dachtest, ich würde im Vorzimmer warten. Der Richter hämmerte mit seinem Gavel. Ruhe im Saal! Aber Daniel war bereits in Bewegung. Er stürzte zum Ausgang, wurde aber von Lukas aufgehalten, der ihm ein Bein stellte. Als die Polizisten ihn hochzogen, sah er mich an. Nicht mehr überlegen, nicht mehr kontrollierend. Zum ersten Mal sah ich Furcht in seinen Augen. »Es ist vorbei«, sagte ich. »Die Wahrheit kommt immer ans Licht.« »Du denkst, du hast gewonnen?« Er lachte bitter. »Du hast keine Ahnung, was du getan hast. Die Leute, mit denen ich arbeite, sind bereits verhaftet«, unterbrach Thomas ihn. »Deine Partner waren nicht so loyal, wie du dachtest.« Während sie Daniel abführten, spürte ich Emilys Hand in meiner. Keine Worte waren nötig. Wir hatten beide verstanden, dass manchmal der größte Sieg nicht in der Rache liegt, sondern darin, die Wahrheit ans Licht zu bringen. Die Schlüssel zu Bright Horizons fühlten sich schwer in meiner Hand an. Das Gebäude war still. Die Morgensonne warf lange Schatten durch die Glasfassade. Mein neues Büro, Daniels altes, wartete im obersten Stock. Bereit? Emily stand neben mir, ihre Hand auf meinem Arm. Ich nickte. Während wir den Fahrstuhl nahmen, dachte ich an Vanessas letzte Worte vor ihrer Aussage gegen Daniel. Manchmal ist der einzige Weg vorwärts durch die Dunkelheit. Im Büro warteten bereits die ersten Mitarbeiter. Verunsicherte Blicke, geflüsterte Worte. Ich trat ans Fenster, wo einst Daniel gestanden und sein Reich überblickt hatte. »Die Staatsanwaltschaft hat angerufen«, sagte Thomas, der leise eingetreten war. »Daniel hat einem Deal zugestimmt. Er nennt Namen, Daten, Konten. Um seine eigene Haut zu retten«, murmelte Emily. »Nein«, ich drehte mich um. »Um Liam zu schützen. Sein Sohn war das Einzige, was er je wirklich geliebt hat.« Ein junger Mann klopfte an die offene Tür. »Entschuldigung, Frau Weber, die Belegschaft wartet im Konferenzraum.« Ich folgte ihm. Dutzende ängstliche Gesichter sahen zu mir auf. Menschen, deren Existenzen von dieser Firma abhingen. Menschen, die nichts von Daniels Machenschaften gewusst hatten. »Bright Horizons steht für Neuanfänge«, sagte ich. »Ab heute leben wir diesem Namen. Jeder hier bekommt eine zweite Chance. Aber«, mein Blick wurde härter, »nur eine.« Erleichtertes Aufatmen ging durch den Raum. Als sich die Versammlung auflöste, zog Emily mich beiseite. »Lukas und ich haben die Hochzeit verschoben«, sagte sie leise. »Ich will erst meinen Abschluss machen. Verstehen, wer ich bin, ohne…« Sie verstummte. »Ohne den Einfluss deines Vaters?« Sie nickte. »Oder Vanessas oder irgendjemandes.« Ich umarmte sie, spürte ihr Herz gegen meines schlagen. Als ich über ihre Schulter sah, erblickte ich mein Spiegelbild in der Fensterscheibe. Die Frau, die zurückblickte, war nicht mehr die gleiche wie vor einem Jahr. »Mom?« Emily löste sich von mir. »War es das wert? Die Rache?« Ich betrachtete den Sonnenaufgang über der Stadt. »Es war nie Rache, Emily. Es war Gerechtigkeit. Und manchmal ist der Unterschied so fein wie die Linie zwischen Dämmerung und Tageslicht.« Sie verstand. In ihren Augen sah ich die gleiche Stärke, die ich in mir gefunden hatte. Nicht durch Rache, sondern durch die Entscheidung, für die Wahrheit einzustehen, egal was es kostet.